We go.
Evening.
Hello, everybody. I'm Vanessa Harding. I'm chair of the Historic Towns Trust. And on behalf of HTT and BALH, I'm delighted to welcome you to this, which is the first lecture in the series of the fifth year that we've been running this collaboration. And a particular welcome to those joining us for the first time, including any who found us thanks to Matt Brown and the Londonist Time Machine. Come for London, stay for the rest of Britain. HTT and BLH are brought together by our shared passion for our commitment to the history of Britain's regions, towns and cities. HTT's approach to this is through the creation of historical maps and atlases, and we really appreciate this opportunity to reach out to BLH's nationwide audience of enthusiasts. As before, we have 4 lectures on different aspects of HTT's work and projects. Last year's lectures covered our projects in Ripon, Ipswich, Bradford and Chester, and our maps of those 4 towns and cities were published in late 2024 or in 2025, and they are available to order through our website or, of course, through bookshops. This year's lectures are about London, Canterbury, Brecon and St Andrews, all places where we have active mapping projects. I'll say more about today's lecture in a minute and about the others at the end, but first of all, a bit of Zoom housekeeping. So this session uses Zoom webinar, which is slightly different from your standard Zoom meetings. You won't be able to see yourself on screen and everybody is muted. There's a Q&A function, which you'll find at the bottom of your screen. And if you have any questions during the webinar that you want Joe to answer at the end, please drop them into that Q&A box, and we should have plenty of time for questions at the end. The chat function is also open. Please use that if you need to check in with us, if you're experiencing technical difficulties, or if you have any general comments or resources you'd like to share. So today's lecture is on the project to create an atlas of London on the eve of the Great Fire of 1666. And I first spoke about this project in the BLH series in the spring of 2022, when it was an ambition but not a reality. So I outlined what we hoped to do and some of the problems I thought we might encounter, but not at that stage how we might achieve it. Since then, we've been the grateful recipients of a substantial grant from the London Topographical Society, which enabled us to get the project off the ground, and also from the British Academy and the City of London Archaeological Trust, together with generous donations from several of London's leading livery companies and other private individuals. Though, as I shall be saying at the end, we are still seeking funding to bring the project to a timely completion. So our speaker tonight, Joe Saunders, is well known to the BALH audience, but he's also an experienced researcher on 17th century London and its history. And he's one of 3 research assistants who've been working on London on the eve of the Great Fire since July 2025. They've been grappling with several major issues, including reconstructing a directory of streets and street names and capturing the plentiful but scattered evidence for the archaeology of early modern London's built environment. They've also been piloting the actual mapping process in collaboration with our cartographer Giles Darks. And this excellent work has really moved us forwards towards our goal of publication in 2027. We're learning a lot along the way, as Joe will be explaining. And indeed, over to you, Joe.
Excellent, lovely. Thank you very much for that introduction, Vanessa, and thank you very much for hosting the session tonight. Welcome all. I see lots of you in the chat saying where you're from, and it seems from a wet and wild Britain out there tonight. So those of you who have had a bit more rain than you'd like, perhaps that would have been useful about 350 years ago at the onset of the Great Fire. So I'm just going to share my screen first of all. Excellent. Hopefully, you can all see that. Somebody do shout. If you can't see there, a reminder of the title of this talk, set against an image of the burnt area of London during the fire. And this is an engraving taken by Wenceslas Holler, compiled shortly after the fire had devastated what was at that point still very much the medieval city of London that was made of timber, plasterboard, plaster, and was destroyed in this inferno that ripped through over just a few short days in early September. This was a cause of uprooted lives, destroyed businesses, and of course, huge cost to the material and financial situation of the city, and of course, by extension, of England more widely. This was a devastation that, along with the Blitz, is one of the 2 points of major destruction of the capital city. And the major rebuilding effort, which came afterwards, took decades. And of course, the city was never the same again. So that is the context for this evening's talk. So what I'm going to talk about tonight is a work in progress. As Vanessa has said, this is a project that is ongoing. It's a project which is very much in the throes of research and production at the moment, and something that, if you are interested to hear about the sort of the overall scope of the project, and you want to hear more, and hopefully you do after the end of this talk, then do go on the Historic Towns Trust YouTube channel, and you can have a listen back to the talk that Vanessa gave for this series 4 years ago. And it's starting to come together. I'd like to say it's starting to come together anyway since then. So what we're going to do in this talk is I'm going to talk to you about this work that we're doing. And I think it's really important that as researchers that we talk about the nuts and bolts of how we do things, that we lift up the lid, that we don't just present the finished article, and as lovely as that is to see, that actually we think about the how that we do things, you know, the nuts and bolts, sort of lifting up the lid and looking at the engine, as it were. So this might not feel as polished as some of your usual history talks, and I think this is because it reflects the fact that this is work being undertaken, and it might be that there's some points of inspiration and insight that are taken maybe for your own projects as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to look, first of all, very briefly, just to introduce the project for anybody who isn't familiar with the project so far, and just to sort of set the scene. And I'm going to introduce some of our project team, the fantastic people who are making this work. And then I'm going to talk you through the different areas of work that we're currently going through. It is going to be very whistle-stop, I'm afraid, but I'm going to show you the different component parts that are coming together in order to produce what will be an atlas of London on the eve of the Great Fire. So this will be indeed an atlas bound with maps of the city, as well as a gazetteer of place names and a variety of other pieces of information that will create what we hope to be a fantastic publication that will be of use for all sorts of people, whether you're interested in the London of the 1660s is academic, whether it is purely for pleasure or something else entirely. This will be also elements of this available online for people to access as well, particularly the gazetteer. We're very hopeful will be of use to all sorts of people through access made available through the Historic Towns Trust website. So that's the aim of the project. When? Quite obvious, I suppose. London on the eve of the Great Fire, so we're talking 1666, and this is really important for this present project because we're talking about a London before some of the really good maps that we get from the late 17th century onwards. The image that you can see on screen here has been taken from Layers of London, the wonderful Layers of London online project. And this is Morgan's map of 1682. And you can see here outlined in quite a similar way, I suppose, as we would see modern mapping that we might be familiar from the 18th, 19th and 20th centuries. So London on the eve of the Great Fire is not been mapped to this this extent, to this quality, and actually this means that the resource that we are hoping that we will be producing, the resource that we produce will actually be invaluable in lieu of anything else that existed before the fire's devastation. London at this point is not just the historic medieval city of London. We are talking here about a wide built-up area here. As you can see, hopefully from the map here, we're talking about Westminster, what became the West End, parts of the East End, and Southwark as well. So this is a wide metropolis at this point, and it is a huge project. And I can be corrected perhaps at the end of the talk, but I believe this is the biggest project, or certainly one of the biggest projects that the Historic Towns Trust has ever taken on in terms of its scale and its detail.
Joe, can I just interrupt you? A lot of people are finding that there's a panel on the right-hand side that's slightly obscuring that. Can you clear that?
Yeah, I should be able to.
Apologies.
Yep. Sorry, how's that?
That's gone now. Perfect.
Yep.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Vanessa.
Thanks, everybody who raised that.
Good. Thank you for bringing that up. Good. Sorry about that, everybody. So we started this project practically in terms of research work in the summer of 2025. As Vanessa said, there's been work going on to bring this together for some time beforehand. So far, we have undertaken 2 pilot projects. We did these in the summer during July and August in order to develop and test our methodologies for the overall project, seeing things through the whole process in order to envisage the work that would be needed once we expanded from our pilot areas to the metropolis as a whole. And then since then, we've been working on respective strands of work which have covered the whole of the project area and which I will discuss here during the talk this evening. As we look forwards from this present point in time in January 2026, we're actually looking now at moving parish by parish, feature by feature, looking to capture specific detail across the project area. And this here will be the area that we cover. This is overlaid on the area, a map of London that might be familiar to some of us today. Just to orientate yourselves, the area within the green here is what we are aiming to capture with the project. So you can see here across some maybe more familiar landmarks than with the last map. So let's meet the team. We have a range, as I said before, of excellent people involved. We've got Vanessa Harding, of course, who is here chairing this session tonight. He's our project lead, expert in medieval and early modern London, formerly professor at Birkbeck University of London, and has instigated and really driven forward the project. As well as that, Vanessa's been involved in all sorts of practical work during the project, working through, for example, thinking about parish boundaries, has done quite a lot of the grant writing and project management of the project, as well as offering, of course, expertise on sources and approaches. We're also very grateful to have Adele Sykes, who brings both an interest in the history of London and with a PhD in that subject, and a background in professional project management. So together we have in Adele a real passion and interest in the history of London, but also this great project management experience, which I'm going to mention in a little bit more detail in a moment, because with a project like this, you really do need to be on top of all of those moving parts. We also have the cartographer of the Historic Towns Trust working on this project, Giles Darks. And Giles is the cartographical editor for the HTT, who works on a number of projects all at once, and is responsible essentially for turning our research from archival sources into the results, the kinds of things that you see and hopefully love with our visual maps and atlases. And then we have the 3 research assistants that have been brought in for this project. We have Richard Asquith, who, amongst other things, is the archivist of the Vintners Company, has a strong interest in the history of London, and has been working on collating our bibliography as well as relaying information found in archaeological sources and as part of our research work into graphical depictions that Giles, our cartographer, can work with. We also have Michael Powell Davis, and Michael has a PhD again in the history of London, and he's currently working at Birkbeck, University of London, on a fantastic project on non-elite writing in 17th century England. And myself, I work as a freelance historian. I am also doing a part-time PhD on the English print trade, which in the 17th century, which in this period was very much London focused. And I've been working on the working directory, which we'll talk about very shortly. We also have, and I've named just the core project team here, but we owe our work to a range of people who have been involved, including Dorian Gerhold with practical research and insight, and Peter Barber with his fantastic insight into mapping, who both sit on our steering committee, as well as Caroline Barron and James Winterbottom, who bring both an interest and expertise in London, both past and present, and have been involved in fundraising for us as well, and have done a fantastic job, I should say. So this maybe is not the kind of thing that we often talk about in talks with history societies and lectures and things, but I think it is really, really so important to talk about project management, because with a project like this, which is so large, has so many moving parts, which has so much of a risk of losing its way, of communication breaking down, is really, really key. And our project management, we're very grateful to our project manager, Adele, who has set up all of the different strands of project management to keep us on track, to make sure that we can share things, to make sure that we have our regular meetings and that we're meeting our agreed targets. So what we have is we have a Microsoft Drive where we can deposit various files of sources and things that we've produced as well as part of the project. There's also a calendar and a method of communication there as well, and we can hold our meetings through this when we're not all able to get together in London. We also have regular meetings, both with our core project team, but also we have steering group meetings on a quarterly basis. And as I give this talk now, about a week ago, we had our most recent of these. And for these, Adele assists in putting together fantastic reports so we can see where we are in terms of our targets, our deliverables, and in order basically to summarize progress over the previous quarter and to envisage where we want to be over the following quarter. And this has been really, really useful for us, all making sure that we're on track and that we are all sure of where everybody else fits in to the system. And in that spirit, I'll share one of Adele's most recent inventions, I suppose, is this fantastic flowchart, which I will leave up for a moment. You can have a little look at here. But what you can see here is sketched out all of the core parts of the project, how they feed into one another, how they correlate, and the results that they move into, the tangible research outputs that we're aiming to deliver. And something like this, I've not put together personally for any of the projects that I've done before. But this is really, really useful, I think. And if you take one thing away from this talk, then maybe putting together something like this is the way to go. It's certainly something that I'm going to be thinking about for my future projects. Excellent. So Through the rest of this talk, I'm going to talk about the process of research and collation that we've been undertaking so far, and talking about some of the material that has been extracted in order to inform the Atlas and Gazetteer that we'll be producing. I'm going to start with one of our key strands, which is looking at archaeological sources which are being pulled together or have been pulled together during the second half of 2025 into a bibliography. Now, of course, 17th century London is very rich in sources, excavations, reports, and in order to focus our research into these, we need to organise essentially what we have. So what we've been able to do is we've been able to undertake a systematic review of publications, looking where possible at unpublished reports as well, on the archaeology, the material remains, and the recording buildings of early modern London. And from this, we've been able to create a bibliography, extracting information from them, and then from these, they will be mapped into the eventual atlas. This information feeding forward from the kinds of sources that you can see here through our bibliography, eventually towards our final product. So the list of sources are huge, and I'm not going to talk us through all of these here, but just to give you a sense of the range that our research assistants, Michael and Richard, have been looking at during this process. So, for example, we have periodicals such as Architectural History, British Archaeology, the Bulletin of the Institute of Archaeology, publications such as English Heritage's archaeological monographs, the London and Middlesex and Archaeological Society special papers, other things such as from the Archaeology Data Service, from ArchSearch, which is a database of metadata records. The list really could go on, and I won't. But just to give you a flavour of the wide range of publications that we are drawing on during this process. These are now coming together into our bibliography. This is a list of works that we are going to be, and in some cases have already begun, working through in order to extract information. And these have been arranged into an Excel spreadsheet, which has got tabs, as you can see here, for title, volume, other various information that is useful for the next stage of the project. One of the key things to underline here is that bibliography has a field for identifying parish, which is where each site is being linked to. So, for example, we can see here the parishes of St Martin in the field, parish of St Martin in the field at the top. This is really important because parishes were such a key part of local government as well as religious practice in medieval and early modern London, and most listings of inhabitants, of rates, taxation, mortality, key indicators for the characteristics of any neighbourhood and for other elements of our research are all arranged by parish. So it's been quite time consuming for our research assistants to identify where many of our features lie, because a lot of the archaeological reports aren't listed by parish. So actually what they've had to do is they've had to then work backwards using, for example, maps and parish boundary markers on things like layers of London in order to work back and see where each feature or each area, what parish that belonged to. So this has been quite time consuming, but ultimately very, very valuable in order for us to be able to identify the locality for these features from the bibliography. And I should say that organisation by parish is quite common in terms of project work of this kind. For example, Tony Dyson's card index survey of documentary records for waterfront properties for Museum of London Archaeology, and as well as, of course, Derek Keane and Vanessa Harding's sources for property holding in London before the Great Fire, which was published a few years ago now. And Survey of London volumes are also mostly organised by parish. So this has been really important, and organisation by parish is a theme that I'll touch upon later on in the talk as well. In addition to the above, the project team are also compiling the usual working bibliography for a research project. So additive rather than systematic, adding references and things as we've come to this. And this will be eventually incorporated into our spreadsheet. So, working directory. This is my particular area of the project, so I've done my best to cut this down as short as possible, but you'll forgive me if I enjoy talking about this quite a lot because I've spent a lot of the last 6 months talking about and thinking about this kind of thing. So you can see here a snapshot of the city as it meets or as it met the north end of London Bridge. You can see here Thames Street and St Magnus Martyr, marked on Ogilvy and Morgan's map of the city in 1676. And what we're doing with the working directory is to create a database. I'm using Microsoft Access, but the data from this can be moved across into an Excel spreadsheet or other formats as necessary. And this is going to feed into both the creation of the atlas and the accompanying gazetteer as evidence of both existence of pre-fire features and of name forms. So how are these names actually given in contemporary documents or near contemporary documents to the fire? The working directory currently contains 3,500 distinct features. So all of the features, for example, named on here, Thames Street, London Bridge, some of them that you can't see written down because they're actually symbolised. So you might see there underneath the square that is the Church of St Magnus Martyr, C.59. So working through all of these features and putting them together into this working directory. These locations have been, much like the working bibliography discussed above, have been organised by parish. You can see here, hopefully, a faint blue outline of a parish here. Of some of the parishes, and these have been organised by both parish but also by grid reference, which will go on our eventual map as well. We're using a range of sources. The first 2 sources that we've looked at, which have covered the entirety of our project between them, are the maps by Ogilvy and Morgan, which were put together in the decades after the fire. You can see here broadly the same area, here the north end of London Bridge with Thames Street and St Magnus Martyr. So working through these maps, both visually looking at versions of them, for example, on Layers of London, but also through London Topographical Society, as well as using the indexes that have been produced from the London Topographical Society, which give the explanations and the expansions of the symbols that you see, which were used in order to denote some of the smaller features, the lanes, the alleys, the courts, and things like that. These have been drawn together, and from this we have a working directory of names which covers our whole project area, so from Westminster to Wapping, from Shoreditch to Southwark. This has been fairly laborious, I will say, especially in order to make sure that each feature is linked to its specific parish and grid reference. But again, this sets us up very well for the following phase of the project in order to understand where all of these features are or were geographically. The next pair of sources considered have been Leake's 1666 survey of the area of the fire, as well as Holler's engraving, which you saw at the first slide tonight. These are both useful sources for confirmation of pre-fire status or not, and also of name forms that were contemporary to the fire, which we will be using to inform our decision on name forms that are given at the end, on the end product. And this is really important for those of you who are familiar with early modern spelling and writing, is that things were spelt in a variety of ways often phonetically, and actually we need to have some sense of how these things were spelt by contemporaries, as well as simply how we might spell them today. To give you a sense of the indexes that we've been working with, this is an index which you can see here from London Topographical Society's A to Z of Restoration London, which is their publication version of the 1676 map. And you can see here, for example, the L's here with, for example, we'll start with London House, London House Yard, and in brackets next to them, those symbols. So the process has been to work through these maps and then to look at the relevant indexes. We've got a range of sources that will be continued to be added and consulted in order to refine and progress the working directory from its current position, which currently looks something like this. This is just a small snapshot of the first few entries and only parts of those entries. And you can see here arranged by grid reference, confirmation of whether we believe this to have been pre-fire or not, Ogilby and Morgan's maps, and their respective references. And as you can see then, names as given in Leek and Holler, and there are other sources which for some areas have been added already, and others which will be consulted, for example, the half tax, as we move through the parish by parish phase. Okay, so the cartographic work. This is the Historic Towns Trust's London map. As you can see, a lot less built up than London was in the mid to late 17th century. But this gives you a flavour of the sort of thing that we're aiming for. Of course, much bigger and of course presented in a different way in terms of an atlas rather than a map, as those of you who have got the 1520 London map will be familiar with. So in order to map London's pre-fire features as accurately as possible, many of which have, of course, long since been lost or destroyed, even if they survived the fire, as much of the wider metropolis did, of course, we've developed a methodology that combines visual, cartographic, and documentary sources, some of which we've been talking about so far in this talk, and I've done them a severe injustice, but hope to give you a flavour of some of that work that we've been undertaking. The results from this work provide a range of information which can then be plotted onto 19th century OS base map, which is a guide for the Historic Towns Trust's cartographic editor, Giles, who I mentioned earlier on, who can then work into a final map, which of course will look something like this. So I want to talk you through this process because this is sort of the third strand, as it were, in terms of putting together this base map. So we have decided to invest in digitising Ordnance Survey maps, covering the area to be mapped in the project. Normally the Trust digitises maps that are about 25 inches to the mile to form the basis of its printed output. But for this project, we've chosen the maps from the middle of the 1890s, which are about 60 inches to the mile. We've done this in order to pick up increased detail that larger scale maps offered, and I know that Giles is particularly pleased with the amount of detail that we've had through this. This digitised base map can be used, I should say, not just for this present project, but actually will be useful for future projects should the Trust wish to undertake this on the history of London. The base map that's been created is 44 sheets, which cover this whole area of the metropolis that we're looking at. The maps have been taken from the National Library of Scotland as raster scans at high resolution. Hopefully that means something to you at home. It doesn't to me, so please don't ask me questions about raster scans and vectorization because I'm not a cartographer and I couldn't answer, I'm afraid. But they have, I'm reliably informed, been acquired as raster scans, which have then been joined, georectified, which involves plotting coordinates that were used in the 1890s against modern equivalents, so that the OS sheets will coincide with modern coordinate systems and by modern geographical applications. These maps have then been vector digitized with not all of the maps features captured, but the buildings and road lines, these key points that we need. Things like administrative boundaries and labels, such as street names, have not been captured because it's easier to add them in later. The result then is an Adobe Illustrator file where map features are available to add cartographic styling to. So colours, labels, symbols, for example. Buildings all exist as separate polygons to which a style can be applied. An Illustrator then works in layers. So you've got these different map features which can be assigned to different layers so that we have a high degree control on the way that they are shown. We then add additional information back in, for example, a selection of the 1890s street names, which can then be used to form our base map. Amongst the significant features that you can see here, for example, are parish boundaries, which are really important, but we're also going to be putting in ward boundaries where relevant in order to provide that jurisdictional outline as well. And this is the third key strand of work that we've successfully been undertaking during the first phase of the project, and which will be key, of course, into the creation of the final atlas. So how do we marry up all of this information? And you will be excused, and I've done my best, but you will be excused if your head is perhaps spinning at this point and there is a lot of information coming together. I did talk about project management at the beginning, and actually this is partly why project management is so key for a project, not just like this, but this specific project, because there are so many moving parts and there are so many pieces of information and strands of work that need to be pulled together in order to produce the eventual product that we will be developing. So how do we marry this all up? So we're going to take our three core building blocks, the archaeological reports that we've highlighted during the bibliographical phase, which provides excellent information in the built environment, often the lost built environment of early modern London. We also take the working directory, which has thousands now of named features and shows and is increasingly showing which are pre-fire or not. And we take, of course, our base map, which we have produced, which this information will be fed into in order to develop the final mapping output. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk now about two case studies from our pilot projects. These are projects that we undertook back in the summer in order to test the entire process all the way through. And what we did is we took two inner city parishes, the parishes of St George Botolph Lane and St Botolph Billingsgate, which were two very small parishes that were right near the epicenter of the fire. Today, they're broadly in the area that we might know as Monument and Monument Street. We also looked as a complete contrast during our pilot study in order to get a sense of the breadth of area and the different types of things that we'll be looking at in this project. We also looked at St Giles in the Fields, which is at this point was still somewhat in the fields, but increasingly built up, increasingly suburban, the area that we might know over towards Denmark Street, the British Museum, that kind of thing today, Tottenham Court Road. So the process, I should say, for this has been undertaken by our colleague Richard Asquith, who's done a fantastic job in both undertaking this work, but with thanks to Richard for providing me with some of these sketches as well. So St Botolph Billingsgate, the church of, was very close to the epicentre of the Great Fire. It was destroyed relatively quickly and it was not rebuilt. It's therefore not shown on Morgan and Ogilvy and Morgan's maps in the following decades, and its footprint was increasingly subject to a process of encroachment, of division, of redevelopment, and it had left very little discernible trace by the point of the OS surveys in the 1800s. We can be relatively clear on the footprint of the church, however, thanks to Leake's survey. This was the survey that was carried out immediately after the fire, as well as from archaeological work that's been done in the 20th century, which uncovered some of the foundations of the church. So actually, for the purposes of mapping the outline of the footprint of the church was actually relatively straightforward, and we're fortunate, as I say, in some of the survivals. But actually, the issue lay in plotting its actual size and location. So assuming that late 17th century footprint of roads had remained largely the same until the 19th century, we can import then the plan of the church over the more modern maps, and this has been done. Richard undertook this using ArcGIS Pro. This map then was laid on top of the OS base map, which we can see here. And this process essentially of trial and error, so of resizing, of reworking, repositioning, in order to fit this in properly. One of the problems with this is that actually Leake's post-survey map had actually missed off Hammond's Key, which is this sort of feature along to the west of the church. So a good reminder, essentially, that we're always working with fallible sources, and we always have to take a consideration of sources in the round in order to make our best judgment, our best value judgment on what is the best that we can do. So the church, though, has been placed with a reasonable degree of confidence, using all of these different sources and using a fair bit of Richard's own intelligence and understanding, and then can be plotted here and traced over in order to conform to the needs of the project. And we can then take this feature and be fairly confident in where we have plotted this. We, of course, have to do this with not just this church, but a numerable number of other features which have been lost and were never rebuilt, from which we're using a range of documentary sources as well as archaeological ones. A slightly different problem was presented by the Church of St Giles in the Fields, which lay at this time in the suburbs of the city and therefore escaped destruction during the fire. However, the present structure was rebuilt in the 18th century. This is another real issue for us as researchers. Even things that escaped the fire, very little of that survives through to the present day. So during the 18th century, this was rebuilt. And because this area was outside the remit of some of our key sources, so Leake's 1666 survey, as well as the Ogilvie and Morgan map of 1676, which are the sources which are most likely to give a good church building footprint, we've had to use some of these other sources and look at a range of other things. For example, Morgan's map of 1682, which doesn't actually give a great perspective. It gives us sort of more of a bird's eye view, similar to Faithorne and Newcourt's map, which you see here. These are abstract representations, but they are useful. They show broadly the outline of the church with its nave, with its tower, essentially that this is sort of slightly offset to the north. It shows the vestry, and we can show, it shows the vestry, which was apparent on Morgan, but actually we don't have a documentary record of this before. So we can presume it was probably constructed sometime between the fire and Morgan's map. So again, using a range of these different sources of comparison and cross-referencing, we can then sketch out, and Richard has done this by hand, sketch out what we believe the footprint of the church looked like in 1666, and in order to then position it on the map. And actually positioning it on the map was much easier compared to St Botolph Billingsgate because we knew the site of the church. It was just the actual footprint of the church that we needed to reconstruct. There are a range of other challenges and issues with this process, which I won't go into just now, but safe to say this is a fairly laborious process, and is the reason that this project takes several years, is that we've got a lot of this kind of thinking that needs to be undertaken, and much of it I'm very grateful to say that we've already done, which is nice, but still quite a lot more to do. Good. Just as we come to the end of the talk tonight, I do want to mention fundraising, because this is one of the key elements of the work. Again, like project management, it isn't the most exciting to talk about. I've not got much to show for it in terms of any nice graphics or anything like that. But it's really important to say that with all of the Historic Towns Trust projects, these are funded through various grants and donations. So it's really important for us to be able to have this money to contract staff, for example, Giles, myself, the other research assistants, as well as, for example, undertaking the vector digitisation of the base map. We've had the benefit, and I will say a huge thank you to organisations including the London Topographical Society, the British Academy, the City of London Archaeological Trust, and these grants have enabled us to focus work on distinct areas, often reporting back both through our steering group, but also through written reports that we've provided as well. We also are seeking donations, and I mentioned at the very beginning of the talk a couple of our extended team members, Caroline Barron and James Winterbottom, who are Historic Towns trustees, amongst other things, and who have been looking at sources of funding, for example, asking if the livery companies of London are able to support us in any way. And I'm very thankful that several of them have. And of course, all of our donations and grants will be very gratefully acknowledged, not just by us now and me here, but in the final publication as well. So where do we stand? Well, we've completed our three base strands, I suppose, for want of a better phrase, in terms of our base mapping, in terms of the working directory, the bibliography, and we have done various pilot projects as well to see test the project all the way through within specific areas. And we're now working parish by parish, feature by feature, in order to complete this project, hopefully for early 2027. So we've got a lot of work still to do. This, of course, is a huge project in itself, but I feel we're in a really good position in terms of this base groundwork, these foundations that we've built, from which we will be able to develop the next phase of the project, and getting into really exciting things. Some of these sorts of decisions that I've been talking about in those two church examples, actually thinking about really hard, taking the information we've got and thinking really hard about what was in the city in 1666 before the fire, what was it called, where was this placed, and actually starting ourselves to get a real fantastic sense of London as it stood on the eve of the Great Fire, and then during later 2026 and into 2027 actually being able to pull this together into a publication which will enable the rest of you to see what we are seeing already about the condition of London as it stood on the eve of this catastrophe. So I talked about donations. We do have the ability for anybody to donate, and if you are able to support this project, it would be hugely beneficial in terms of the work that we can do pushing this forward towards completion, as Vanessa said at the beginning, towards a timely completion, especially the quicker we get this out, the quicker everybody can have a look. So there's a QR code there and a link to the website. And actually, you can look at donating to any of the Trust's various projects. For more information on the Historic Towns Trust, do go to our website. And it leaves me to say, first of all, thank you to the team for the fantastic work that I've been able to be part of, and the work that you've done in order to drive this forward. It's been a joy to work on this project so far, and it's fantastic to continue working with the team. And thank you specifically to the team for assisting with this talk. I had so much help in terms of input of ideas and images and things like that in order to hopefully present you, as I say, a very whistle stop, and I've certainly not done it justice, but give you a sense of some of the work that we've been doing. And thank you to all of you for listening. So I'm going to draw that to a close. If you've got any questions, I will do my very best to answer them in the time that we have remaining. And if you do want to get in touch with me, then please do elsewhere. But I will stop sharing my screen now.
Well, if I could start just now by thanking you, Joe, that was amazing. As somebody involved in the project, it's wonderful to hear your enthusiasm for it and to reflect on how much has been achieved in that 6 months in which the three research assistants have been working together. I gather we've had something like 240 people have actually been attending this lecture, so I wouldn't be at all surprised if there were some questions. I think you can probably see them. Can you see the Q&A?
Yeah, I can see questions coming in, yeah.
Okay. Do you want to launch straight into that? And then I will wrap up after that.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll take a few questions because we've got some time, and perhaps Vanessa, if there's anything that you want to chime in with as well, that would be very useful. We've got a very good one, I suppose, first of all, in some ways, from Richard Carpenter. What are the gaps that this project is hoping to fill? Which I guess I sort of touched on it at one point in the talk in terms of this sort of snapshot of London that we don't have before it's burnt. We have a variety of maps available in the 17th century, but we don't have anything like the sort of the scale and the detail that we are hoping for here. In terms of perhaps scholarly gaps, I don't know if there's anything that Vanessa, you might wish to mention. I
think it's sort of bringing reality to the early years of Pepys's diary, perhaps. You can see what he tells us a lot about the fire. He tells us about what it was like afterwards, what the rebuilding was like. But this should help us see the city, the London that he knew in his early years. I'm sure that we will discover problems as we go along that will be gaps that we didn't know we had to fill, but we'll have to fill them.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point indeed. Good. I think there is so much value in, I would say this of this project in particular, but in terms of the Trust's maps and atlases generally, in terms of being able to use these in academic works. And there's a question here as well about the potential use of this map in the future Museum of London. There are all sorts of outreach opportunities in terms of, I know the Trust in other places working with projects to provide maps and versions of them to school groups, to work with children, with members of the public. So there's all sorts of applications from the scholarly right the way through to sort of illustrative kind of uses of these maps, which I think makes them really valuable generally. We've got some technical questions, which I'll do my best to answer. The first one is one that I think I can answer fairly reasonably, which is what are the numbers on Morgan's and Ogilvy and Morgan's maps? And I sort of skimmed over this partly because it maybe is boring to those of you who aren't going to spend a lot of time like I have for the last 6 months looking at this. And these are essentially symbols that are used as shorthand for features on the maps in order to save writing on the maps themselves, partly for space, partly for ease. And these are then can correspond to indexes. They were called explanations in nice 17th century parlance, but these are indexes. So you have these features, for example, lots of churches, but also small lanes and things like that. And these are actually just can be then corresponded to what the names actually were. Quite a clever mapping technique, and I should say, with all of our modern technology and our modern ability to do what we can, the awe with which I hold the teams that worked on these projects, because they're called Morgan's and Ogilvy and Morgan's maps, but there were teams of people working on these. Their ability to put these things together and to do so efficiently and as far as I can see, really quite accurately with the resources they had at their disposal is really impressive. But yeah, that's what the numbers are. If that was from Tim. If you want to talk lots about this in future, please do get in touch. I'd be very happy to wax lyrical about these ongoing. Abigail's asked about the English placenames survey volume for Middlesex, which have we used this? It has some relevant London street names depending on the boundary of the map. And linked to that has asked about finding whether we found any 17th century name forms that we are compiling, which change our understanding of the original meaning of street names compared to modern spelling and modern head forms for street names. Quite a detailed question there. I haven't looked at the English place name survey volume for Middlesex as part of the work that I've undertaken, and it might be that this is be considered at a certain point down the line. In terms of understanding the names, I think there will be some sense in which we can add to the history of name form development in London. And I think particularly the Gazetteer, when we reach that point, will be recording different name forms that were in use in and around the period of the fire, which will be able to be taken and used by scholars who are particularly interested in names and their change and continuity over time. And there are some fantastic examples that we've come across of authentic contemporary spellings and different name styles, I suppose. So, for example, the person who compiled the half tax for St Giles in the Fields called Tottenham Court Road, Tattenham Court Road, and similar things like that. We also see different roads. For example, the roads leading in and out of the metropolis are marked as various things. For example, the road to Hampstead is the name for Tottenham Court Road, but of course was not something that appears to have been in use very commonly, or certainly didn't carry on being used further down the line. Some fantastic questions come in, and I think I'll take a couple more, and then we will move on. But Steve Miller's asked about key instead of sort of quay, as it were, which was commonly used. It's shown on the mapping, but key with a K was commonly used indeed in this period. I'm not sure the linguists amongst you might be able to say, maybe Vanessa, you will, at what point that change came in.
I think I would say we're definitely going to use key with a K, K-E-Y, because that seems to be so commonly that form at the time. So we're trying to represent what people, so the forms in use at the time, and that I don't think Q-U-A-Y comes in for a bit later. So it would be appropriate to use that.
Yeah. Excellent. We've got a question from Nick, which is, do we expect to identify precise addresses of people in the half tax? Which we don't, I'm afraid. We just don't have that capacity here, unless they are substantial individuals for which a property was maybe named after them or they gave their name to. So yeah, we've not got quite that level of detail. It'd be lovely if people could take that forward, and hopefully this research will in the resources that we produce will assist in this going forward. Excellent. I think we've got time for another question or two. If anyone's got any burning questions, to pop them in the Q&A. Stephen Freeth has asked about one of the changes after the Great Fire, which was, of course, the widening of many of the streets, which means that OS maps will show streets after widening, not before. And of course, that's something that we need to contend with as part of the cartographical production of the final atlas. And we are using alongside our base map and the OS maps, we are using the various sources, including the visual maps from the period. Nick's mentioned the Comptroller's Deeds series at the LMA, now of course the London Archives, which includes Robert Hooke's certificates for describing the ground taken for and the widening of roads. And there's a range of sources that relate to the rebuilding of the city in terms of the sort of requisition of areas in order to standardise and widen roads, as well as fire court records, for example, fire rebuildings, fire posting surveys. So we've got a lot of sources that I haven't talked about here. Maybe if we have another one of these work in progress talk, we don't want another work in progress talk, do we? Want a finished product talk. But there will be lots of these sources, which of course we will be using as we work through. I will say, and we've sort of mentioned this in terms of the archaeological material, but there is, of course, a huge breadth. We are sort of spoilt for choice, I think, in terms of the material that we have for 17th century London. And it's, to some extent, decision making around the level of detail that we are able to go into, both in terms of the final product that the publication, but also simply in terms of time and having to develop something within the time frame we have in order to share it with everybody, no less our funders. So there are lots of sources that, unfortunately, and lots of detail that we might not be able to go into at this stage, but perhaps for future projects, and for whether for future iterations of this atlas, or whether for people's specific projects that might be able to build on. One of the things that our cartographer Giles always says is that, and I'll horribly misquote him here, so apologies, Giles, if you're listening, but essentially all maps are always wrong. Which I think is a nice way to look at this. You know, we're doing the best with the resources we've got, and there will be more insight available, of course, in the grand scheme of things. But yeah.
Okay, I think I probably have to draw this to a close now, and I can see there are still more interesting questions that we'd like to answer. You do feel free to email Joe or me or the Historic Towns Trust through our website with these questions, and we'll do our best to answer them at greater leisure. I want to start by thanking Joe very much for his talk. I hope you've all enjoyed this lecture and learned more about our approach and our processes. We will post updates on the project on Trust News on our website. Do encourage you to join our newsletter, where we'll also be shorter updates. I just now want to finish by moving on to the next lectures in this series, which are at roughly 1 month intervals. They look to me to be the last Tuesday in the month. So on Tuesday, the 24th of February, Jackie Eales, well known to the BLH community, Emeritus Professor of History at Christ Church, Canterbury University, will be talking about investigating Canterbury's past. We published a map of Canterbury in 2021, and this is going to be an atlas, which we hope will be out later this year. Then on Tuesday, the 31st of March, Professor Helen Fulton, who's a trustee of the Historic Towns Trust and Professor and Chair of Medieval Literature at the University of Bristol, and she's working on the map of Brecon and Hay, or the map of the two maps to be published as one, of Brecon and Hay. She won't be talking directly about the map, but about family history and the marchers in late medieval Brecon. And then on the 28th of April, Professor Margaret Connolly, Professor of Paleography and Codicology at University of St Andrews, who's leading the project to map St Andrews, the Historic Towns Trust map of St Andrews. This too, we hope to complete within 2026 and publish before the end of the year. So for more information about these, including publication dates and availability, which, as I say, most of them are going to be published this year, please keep an eye on the website, but also please come back to BLH for other lectures in this series, and thank you very much for joining us.